Guys, Erin here. I am back with another moon update for you. And what I'm going to be talking about today is what we will call an excitable new moon we've got coming up here on Monday, May 26th. The new moon peaks at 8:02 p.m. Pacific time, and this takes place in the sign of Gemini, 6 degrees Gemini, hence the excitableness of this new moon. Sign of Gemini tends to get me excited. Okay, now what I'm going to do in this recording is I'm going to break down the sign of Gemini for you because this is a time to be manifesting new beginnings and growth that are related to this sign of Gemini. Approximately 6 months from now, we'll have the full moon in the sign of Gemini. That will be the peak of the growth cycle. And this is kind of a little bit of an extra special new moon in the sign of Gemini because this is the last new moon in Gemini that we will have with Jupiter in Gemini for another 12 years or so. What's going to happen is the new moon peaks at 8:02 p.m. Pacific time on Monday, May 26th. And about a day and a half after that, the moon will transit over the sun. And then a day and a half after that, the moon will transit over Jupiter. We can think of the moon as like a distributor. Okay, when the moon transits over something, another planet or whatever it is, she's distributing that energy. Okay, so she'd be distributing. Jupiter's like the great benefic. Okay, and so manifesting abundance of this Gemini energy. Okay, so there's that. So first I'm going to break down the sign of Gemini for you so you know what you're working with here. Then I'm going to be talking about, well, I'll pull up the chart and we'll go through some other very prominent astrological forces we are receiving at the time of this new moon. This is the first new moon I get to talk about with Saturn in Aries. Hallelujah for that. And there's reasons I'm saying that, which I will share with you when we get there. And there's some other very interesting things going on with the astrological forces. So I'll break that down for you. And then, of course, I'm going to talk about certain parts of the body that are ruled by the sign of Gemini, because these parts of our body become sensitized anytime anything up in the sky is transiting through the sign of Gemini. And for this transit, we've got Sun, Moon, Mercury, which is Gemini's ruler, and Jupiter, all in the sign of Gemini. So it's a good idea to pay a little extra attention to these parts of our bodies. So I will be mentioning some potential herbal remedies to help support these parts of our body during this kind of transit. And on that note, some people, it kind of just depends on how this is hitting your own natal chart. Some people, I've talked to a lot of clients about this, and they're like, wow, I actually can feel it. Say your Sun or your Mercury is in Gemini, you might notice something a little bit more significant than people who don't have anything in the sign of Gemini. That's just one little example. So there's that. We'll talk about those things. And then, of course, as usual, I will mention some gemstones that resonate well with the sign of Gemini. In case you're new here, what I do every single new moon, this is something I've been doing for 9 years now. I pull out my journal, I write down the growth that I want to experience that's related to the sign the new moon takes place in. Okay, and then if you're somewhat familiar with your natal chart, or if you've had a reading with me, you can go back to review to see which house in your natal chart this is specifically manifesting for you. So which house in your natal chart does the sign of Gemini come through? Okay, which area of your life is, I mean, we all have, even if you have no planets in the sign of Gemini, you still have the sign of Gemini somewhere in your natal chart. Okay, it can be coming through your house of home, your house of career, your house of relationships, your house of money, your house of transformation, your house of communication. It's got to be coming through somewhere. Okay, so I look to see which area of my life the new moon is coming through, and I incorporate that into my journal entry. I write down the growth I want to experience. It's related to that sign. So for example, myself, sign of Gemini, this new moon is coming through my 7th house, which is the house of relationships. And of course that can be applied to romantic relationships, but it's not just that. I like to call it the house of contracts because it's any one-on-one relationship, not necessarily a written contract. It could be a verbal contract. So I would incorporate that into my journal entry. And then I like to take a few gemstones that resonate well with that sign the moon is transiting through and put them on top of my journal. You can always find a full extensive list of stones that resonate well with the sign the moon is transiting through in the description below. If you don't have any of those gemstones, that is perfectly okay. Okay, then don't feel like you're missing out on anything. In fact, a new moon is a perfect time to be manifesting more gemstones into your life. In fact, the sign of Gemini, like the dedicated zodiacal birthstone, is actually a very affordable stone. So we'll get into that. Okay, now, let's just roll with this. Okay, the sign of Gemini. This is what we call the mutable air sign. When we talk about mutable signs, we're talking about the adaptable signs, okay? Where all the mutable signs come when we are at the end of a season. Okay, Gemini is the last zodiac sign before we go into summer. So what it's doing is it's mutating the energy. That said, people who are born with a lot of mutable signs in their chart, like a lot of planets coming through mutable signs, they just tend to be a little bit more adaptable, a little bit more flexible in life, okay? And in the element of air, this has a lot to do with intellect. In fact, the motto for the sign of Gemini is I think. It's a very, very intellectual energy. But all the air signs are also in some way, shape, or form kind of associated with being a sociable person. Okay, I think of the sign of Gemini as like the social butterfly of the zodiac. It's like, I always think of, all the way back going into high school, I've always had a lot of Gemini friends, like groups of friends that are, a lot of them are Geminis. And they're always the popular ones that were going over and socializing over here. Ooh, I'm going to talk to these people. Ooh, I'm going to go socialize over here. And very low likelihood of being judgmental towards, like, say, somebody's style. Mutable signs tend to be able to hang out with all different types of people. Okay, they can hang out with the nerds over here, hang out with the jocks over here, hang out with the cheerleaders over here, that sort of thing. It's very Gemini energy. Okay, now, sign of Gemini is ruled by Mercury, which Mercury has a major influence on our communication skills and our mental function. Okay, Mercury, in short, is how we're receiving information being processed into our consciousness, but also that information being brought back out. Sign of Gemini is like the sign of the communication being ruled by Mercury. Mercury is the messenger of the gods. You guys have heard me talk a lot about Mercury, so I don't want to go on too much of a tangent. But yes, Mercury is directly associated with a lot of archetypes who are messengers of the gods. Okay, we're talking about, again, Hermes in Greek mythology, Odin in Norse mythology, and Thoth in Egyptian mythology. Okay, all of those archetypes are characters that can basically like go up to the heavens and get messages from the gods up there and then come down to earth and relay the messages here and go into the underworld and hang out with the Hades in the underworld and then get messages from there and take it back up to earth. That is very Gemini energy. Again, like the social one that can go around and hang out with all different types of people, but it's very much about communication. Now, whether that be verbal communication or written communication, you'll notice a lot of people who have a lot of strong Gemini energy in their natal chart, they tend to, they like to write, or again, they're just verbal communicators. That can also happen if somebody's got a lot of stuff in their third house. But I do know quite a few of my clients who have like a heavy dose of Gemini energy in their chart or third house energy in their chart. If you don't know what I'm talking about with the houses, don't worry about it. But they are either heavy writers or they're authors of books. Okay, I've actually got 3 clients where I obviously can't say who they are, but they're fairly recognized authors. Okay. Now, in fact, on that note, since we're trying to manifest more of this Gemini energy into our life, this is such a perfect time. If you've never pulled out a journal and wrote down, what it is you're trying to manifest or whatever, just never written stuff in a journal, or maybe you haven't done it since you were in high school or something like that, this is the time to start. Because I kid you not, you guys, I would not be making these videos and repeating this over and over and over again and continuously writing in my journal for 9 years, with the new moon manifestations, if I didn't see results coming from it. And it's so important to understand on that note that the intentions really have to be there. It's not just just blurting things out. It's very much about setting the intentions. But this is a fantastic time to get yourself a journal. If you can't have a journal, any old scrap paper just hanging around your house. Say it's the back of an envelope so that you got in the mail, whatever it is, something along those lines. Maybe you want to manifest a journal. Write that down on some scrap piece of paper. Okay, so there's that. Now, sign of Gemini is represented by the twins. Okay, this sign actually has a lot to do with siblings. The twins there's a strong sense of duality that comes with the sign of Gemini. In fact, I'll just say this right now. The sign of Gemini rules a lot of different parts of the body, but there's 2 of the hands, the shoulders, the lungs. Okay. And with that said, this is a sign that can almost want to go 2 directions at the exact same time, or feel 2 ways about something at the exact same time. Okay. It's very much when you think about, I'll just put this out there. Way back in the early days of studying astrology, when I was almost reading kind of like silly astrology books, I remember, I think this book was called like The Dark Side of Astrology or something like that, where it said the sign of Gemini is like recognized for being bipolar. Okay. Now, clearly, not everybody who's even close to, being a Gemini is going to be bipolar. But what they meant by that is that it's almost like, because it's kind of shifty, because it's represented by the twins. Okay. So with that said, how do you want to grow in these ways? I will say this. I happen to thoroughly enjoy the sign of Gemini. And as I've talked about before, the only thing that I have in the sign of Gemini is Jupiter. But that makes me quite Geminian because I'm a Sagittarius rising, which means Jupiter is the ruler of my chart. So whatever sign Jupiter is coming through in my own natal chart, it's kind of a big deal. You guys notice I'm always talking with my hands. That's very Gemini energy. Okay, now what I'd like to be focusing on is communication skills. I think that's something that's really, really important that we be focusing on. It's like reading through comments on whatever it is, YouTube, Instagram, something like that, and seeing like the brutal interactions with people. I mean, granted, I don't think people would, I see people say really awful things to one another through comment sections. And I'm not really confident that those people would be spouting things off like that if they were in person. But still, I would really put some emphasis on communication skills for this transit. If you want to work on, better, stronger, clearer communication skills. Or another thing to consider is that, some of us are quite the hermit over here, quite the hermit. And so, I can totally go to a social gathering, like a huge event, and socialize the heck out of the event for about 29 minutes. And then I'm exhausted and I need to go back into my hermit shell. And with that said, this is a time where I like to manifest, really tapping into those social skills and being able to utilize them. Okay. So those are the things that I'm going to be focusing on with manifesting this energy. And as I mentioned, like this is coming through my seventh house. My seventh house has a lot to do with clients, like being able to, socialize with clients more and that sort of thing. Honestly, I'm the kind of person where if I open up my Instagram and I see I've got, more than 5 messages in my inbox, I'm like, no, can't do it. I just get so overwhelmed with socializing with people. So that's what I'm going to be working on for this new moon. For yourself, you can, whatever it is, say it's coming through your house of career and you want to use this energy to, use better communication skills in your career or just overall out in public, whatever it is, wherever it's coming through your chart. Not only that, but also take into consideration if you have anything near 6 degrees Gemini, depending on what it is, regardless, it's still going to be a little bit of an extra special new moon for you. Maybe you've got something trining that near 6 degrees Libra or Aquarius. Maybe you've got something opposing that near 6 degrees Sagittarius. Maybe you've got something squaring that near 6 degrees Virgo or Pisces. So those are all things to take into consideration. Everybody experiences this new moon at 6 degrees Gemini as a collective, but it's so important to realize that this is so incredibly unique to each and every one of us. Okay, so there's that. Let me go ahead and pull up the chart here. In case you are new here, I work with geocentric Western astrology. So with that said, what we're looking at here is basically like a snapshot of what we'd call the tropical zodiac at the time of this new moon. So here we see there's the symbol for the moon. There's the symbol for the sun. We can see that they're both at 6 degrees and 6 arc minutes to be very exact. Look at that, 6, 6, 6, 6. Ooh. Okay, now this is what happens every time we have a new moon. The sun and the moon come together and they meet in the exact same degree and the exact same minute in the exact same zodiac sign. In case you're super new to this stuff, the way it works is the sun takes an entire year to go around the zodiac versus the moon goes around here every single month. So with that said, every single month, the moon is catching up to the sun. And that is like the masculine and the feminine, sun being masculine, moon being feminine, mother and father coming together to create this new energetic force. I always describe it as like the energetic baby that grows. That's how it works. That's why new moons, for God knows how many years, people have been using new moons to manifest that new beginning and the growth. Okay. And that's very specifically, energetically speaking, how it works. Okay, now at 6 degrees, this is still the very first decan of that Gemini energy. So it's very, very pure energy coming through here, very pure Gemini energy coming through. It's not necessarily blending in with any other zodiac signs yet. And by the way, happy solar return season to all of you Geminis out there. I love you guys so much. The year that I hung out with the most Geminis, like ever, it was just the weirdest thing. As some of you have heard me say, that I worked on a farm before, to be specific, a cannabis farm, before I was an astrologer. I was studying astrology, but I was working on this farm. And there was a lot of, some of you might know what trimmers are, trimmers that come around once a year to trim the cannabis. And there was one year where there was like 7 girls that came in, and every single one of them was a Gemini. I think one of them was a Gemini rising. But other than that, it was just me with this huge group of all Geminis. And I kid you not, that was the luckiest year of my entire life. That was how many years ago now? Goodness, 9 years ago now. That was the luckiest year of my life. That's why I just adore you Geminis so much. Okay, so there's that. Now, so again, there's a symbol for the sun, there's a symbol for the moon. Now what we want to focus on here is there's Mercury, Gemini's ruler. So this is great. We've got Mercury going forward. He's not in retrograde. He's in his own home in the sign of Gemini. He works super comfortably here. Okay, this could be a really good time for having that business meeting or having that important conversation or writing things down or, again, like authoring a book. Another thing about the sign of Gemini can also be very strongly associated with things like social media. Say you want to get on a new platform, or all of a sudden you decide you want to start sharing more information on social media. Something along those lines could also come very strongly with this. Writing that down, okay? Now, also, here is Jupiter. So Jupiter, it is June 9th that Jupiter's been in the sign of Gemini since last June. It's either June or July of 2024. And now Jupiter, he's scooting along here, and on June 9th, he's going to move into the sign of Cancer. So until June 9th, he's still in the sign of Gemini. And I've talked a lot about this. So Jupiter likes to expand things, okay? Jupiter he's like, we call him the great benefic because he influences things like wisdom and luck and abundance. Jupiter can be a troublemaker sometimes, for sure, especially medical or any kind of astrology. Jupiter can be a little bit problematic in certain cases. But the overall influence that we receive from Jupiter is abundance and philosophy and wisdom, things like long distance travel, especially for the purpose of like seeing the way other cultures live, that sort of thing. That's very Jupiterian energy. The sign of Gemini is the student, it's the forever student that's focusing in on all the little facts of things. And that's what I keep saying. I feel like because my Jupiter is in Gemini, that's in part why I'm constantly wanting to study things that are of, things that expand the consciousness. That's super Jupiter in Gemini. And so while Jupiter's finishing up in there, take that into consideration, especially if you've got anything near, say 26 degrees Gemini, maybe opposing that near 26 degrees Sagittarius, or maybe trining that near 26 degrees Libra or Aquarius, that sort of thing. It just depends on how it's really activating your chart. But really for all of us, this is kind of it's a good time for studying things that you wouldn't have learned in public school. Okay, so there's that. Now, let's jump on down here. Let's go to Mars first. So here's Mars. Finishing up in Leo. Mars is going to be in Leo until June 17th. It's either June 16th or 17th. I love Mars and Leo. Like everybody I know that's got Mars and Leo is a total badass. Like these are people that they have a lot of strength. Of course, there's some things that could counteract this, but for the most part, Mars is, if you just look at the symbol for Mars, Mars is to penetrate. Okay. Mars is what makes us take action. Mars is our muscles and our adrenals. Mars is our people who have a very strong Mars in their chart. Those are the people that are, competitive, athletic, supernaturally ripped, that sort of thing. That's just Mars in general. But the sign of Leo is like the playful, courageous leader of the zodiac. Okay. It's like the sign of royalty. And so Mars, forceful Mars coming through, that Leo is represented by the lion, okay, the courageous and playful lion. So we think about Mars's energy beaming through that. It's like we're all getting hit with this. It's a strength. It's force. It gives us energy, okay? Look to see if you've got anything, say between 17 to 29 degrees, 59 minutes Leo. Then Mars is going to activate that thing. I mean, if it's Mercury, that might get every time Mars transits over somebody's Mercury, they seem to have like frustrating, irritating things that go on in their mental function. But other than Mercury, Mars can kind of rev things up and make you take action. If it's Mercury, again, there might be frustrations. I mean, if it's anything, let's say you got Saturn in there, Mars can also irritate the heck out of Saturn. It just depends on what it is. But for the collective perspective here, Mars going through Leo until June 16th or 17th, that's really giving us overall some great like energy to go do what we got to do. All right, so there's that. Now, let's talk about all this Aries energy that's going on. I kid you not, I feel like the sign of Aries right now is just going like, what is going on? Just that, not necessarily Aries people. Yeah, Aries people probably the same way. They probably are feeling like, what in the world is going on? Because there's just some very interesting blends of energies going on here. First, let's start with Venus. So Venus, I happen to love Venus in the sign of Aries, because it's like people are born with their Venus in Aries, like I am. Like we tend to love the action-oriented things. Like as a kid, I loved monster truck shows, and believe it or not, Little Miss Hippie over here participated in quite a few mosh pits, and just things that are wrong, like Aries energy. Okay. And Venus is going through that sign of Aries, but Venus herself, like going through the sign, yes, she's a little revved up because she's in the sign of Aries, but she's kind of toning it down. Okay. Venus in general, she influences things that are of a calmer nature. It's almost like she soothes. Okay. So she's a little bit fired up because she's in the sign of Aries. Okay. If you picture the goddess of love and harmony and romance and intimacy, she's in a room of revved up fiery energy, but she's toning the energy of that room down with her calm, soothing nature. Okay, look to see if you've got anything near 20 degrees Aries. And then we've got Chiron here, which Chiron's going through the sign of Aries until sometime in 2027. Chiron, the wounded healer. Okay, if Chiron's hitting something in your chart, it's probably some kind of some sort of an influence of healing things that are from your wounds from early childhood, or maybe you're having like a realization of something where, oh my gosh, that happened when I was a little kid, or I remember the time my mom was ignoring me and I was trying to get her attention. That really created anything along those lines. Okay. And with Chiron going through Aries, the warrior of the zodiac, it's the sign of self. He's saying, let's heal these things. Let's heal it. Let's go through this. Let's at least work with intentions to heal these things. And Venus approaching Chiron can actually maybe even soothe some of that healing process here. And Venus is still making a trine with Mars. That's a fading trine, but that's nice. We've got Mars is like our animal passion, okay? Mars is like the masculine man, and Venus is the beautiful woman, and they're harmonizing currently. And Venus, again, she's fairly close to Chiron. So that also could be influencing some sort of, again, like maybe revved up ways of healing, like I'm going to do this, but they're also calmed down with Venus right there. I hope this is making sense. But furthermore, here we have, I'm going to start with Saturn. So Saturn is finally in the sign of Aries. I mean, he's only there till September, that he's going to retrograde back into Pisces, and then finally will be in Aries, like for the next couple of years, in February of next year. And why am I excited about this? Because Saturn has been sitting on my sun for what feels like ever. I'm a very late degrees Pisces. It is not a fun transit to have Saturn sitting on your sun. A lot of discipline, cold feelings of cold energy coming through. But overall, now Saturn is moving on. He's at least for a little while, he's moving past my sun, and he's in the sign of Aries. Now, I will say this for the collective, this is this is not Saturn's favorite sign to be in at all, because Aries does not like boundaries. Aries is, again, Aries is the aggressive warrior of the zodiac. Doesn't mean everybody who's in Aries is going to be aggressive, but the sign of Aries in and of itself it's the warrior. Saturn is about boundaries. Okay. Saturn creates things like restrictions. Saturn is cold and dry and astringent and creates blockages and that sort of thing. And so with that said, if you've got something near, again, it really depends on what it is. If it's Mercury at 0, if you got Mercury near 0 degrees Aries, all of a sudden you might be able to concentrate really, really well because Saturn's there kind of bringing in some focus. But it could also, it's basically, the way I see this is that Saturn is about to be putting some boundaries on the warrior within all of us. But I will also say this as well. This could potentially, and I don't want to freak anybody out, but it is true that Saturn moving into Aries, especially with Neptune just moving into Aries, this could be an influence of some sort of war type of energy. I personally don't think that we're going into World War III right now. I just don't think that's the case. There may be some other things that influence. In fact, there was a time, I can't remember what year it was, but there was a time when Saturn, I believe, was fairly close to Neptune going into the sign of Aries, and something happened where it was like one of the first times that they put regulations on guns. That sort of thing could go on. But it could also, as a collective influence here, it very much could be showing us that we need to be patient with, say, it's like, oh, I got to do this thing. Aries has a little bit of a leader kind of influence, okay? Maybe there's a little bit of we've got to have some patience with something that you've been really working on. Again, it really depends on how this is hitting your chart. But overall, I do think Saturn in Aries, just to sum this up, I think is, especially at the very early degrees of Aries, trying to show people some patience. I hope that makes sense. But it's also really weird because now we've got Neptune and Saturn are going to be fairly closely conjunct all the way until something like March of next year, because they both moved from Pisces into Aries, and then they're both going to retrograde back into Pisces later on this year, and then they both move into Aries again. And then finally Saturn moves past Neptune. But if you can see Saturn's influence, if you could picture like a rigid, forceful old man that's always pointing his finger and saying you have to follow the rules and you have to do your homework and well, and then so that rigid old man, right next to him is this influencer of mysticism and spirituality and fogginess and intuition, because that's Neptune. Neptune in some ways is probably diffusing a little bit of Saturn's rigidness, but at the same time, this could still be something about, and I know this is going to sound strange, but if there's been an issue with addiction, this, again, it kind of depends on how it's hitting your chart, but this could be a transit to help somebody get past an addiction. The reason I say that is because they just left the sign of Pisces. Pisces has a lot to do with addiction, but Neptune has a lot to do with addictions and drugs as well. And Saturn, again, he's the bringer of death. Okay. I don't mean necessarily somebody dying, but it's more like bringing a death to something that, there is some sort of an addiction. I keep talking about, just the drug epidemic in general is just it's a crisis. It's an absolute crisis, knowing especially the whole fentanyl scene. And I mean, I personally don't know anybody like this, but I've seen it a lot through clients' stories and just stuff that I've seen. And it's really tragic. And I do kind of have this, I hope anyway, maybe this is my Pisces delusional thinking, optimistic delusional thinking, that this Saturn being next to Neptune and entering into Aries kind of over the next year or two, that there could be something that helps bring this drug epidemic to an end. Okay, so there's that tangent. All right, now let's talk about let's go over here to Pluto. Okay, so Pluto going through the sign of Aquarius all the way until the year 2044. So another 19 years of this. Now, Pluto is in retrograde. So he's when Pluto, Uranus, or Neptune are in retrograde, they tend to be a little bit more like their force is a little more aggressive in essence. Okay, so Pluto's maybe acting a little more aggressive right now, going through retrograde. Pluto influences a death and rebirth process going through the sign of Aquarius, which Aquarius has a lot to do with things like technology. I am tripping out on what is going on with this whole AI situation and people asking the AI chat GPT or whatever it's called, just the wildest questions. And there's so much controversy around, is this a bad thing? Is this a good thing? We're getting information and I'm seeing all ends of it. I think it's probably both. I think it's probably it's a sketchy thing to be playing around with, but at the same time, it can be also super, super beneficial. One thing I think is a little bit of a shame about it though, is that somebody like me, every single thing that I post, I write, whatever it is I've created my website, I wrote everything myself. Somebody, if I'm doing a lecture somewhere and they need a bio for myself, I write everything myself. I don't ask a robot to help me. And you can see it. You can kind of see it on a lot of people's websites these days where it's like, wait a minute here, I don't think this person wrote this. And it's clearly an AI did it. So that's something to take into consideration. It could be massively beneficial for some people who are trying to build a website and they could use a little AI help. But it's also like it's taking away that challenge of doing things ourselves, including researching things ourselves, that sort of thing. And I feel like Pluto going through Aquarius is playing a role in that, especially while in retrograde. But I also do feel like there's a lot of things I could say about Pluto going through Aquarius. But to sum it up, I also do feel like humanity itself, sign of Aquarius is a sign of humanitarianism. Humanity itself is going through a death and rebirth process over these next 19 years. I mean, a big one. Okay, we're always going through some sort of a transformation, but I think this is a heavy one. And I do think that technology and robots and internet and Wi-Fi and radiation, in fact, Pluto has an influence on things like radiation and cellular mutation. I think that's all going to play a role, and we shall watch this unfold. Okay, so there's that now. And also Uranus right here. So Uranus is kind of so-called sort of finishing up in the sign of Taurus. So he's actually really powerful now as well. So Uranus influence is very abrupt and weird and unpredictable and strange and kind of berserker kind of energy. And going through the sign of Taurus, which Taurus is very much the sign of money. Okay, think about what's going on with the collective's money. Very interesting things. I do think that between now and say maybe in about April of next year, I think we're going to see even more strange things that go on with the collective's money. Okay. And that, again, it depends on how it's hitting your own chart as well. Where's the sign of Taurus coming through your own natal chart? Because Uranus, this bringer of spasmodic weird changes, is finishing up in that area of your life. Okay. So that's something else to consider there. All right. Now, lastly, these nodes. So here's the South Node. South Node's going through the sign of Virgo, currently at 24 degrees Virgo, all the way until July of 2026. South Node will be in the sign of Virgo, moving backwards in retrograde in the sign of Virgo till July of next year. Currently at 24 degrees Virgo, look to see in your chart if you have anything near 24 degrees Virgo, because if so, that South Node is in essence like draining something away that has to do with whatever it is. Let's say it's your Jupiter at 24 degrees or near 24 degrees Virgo, and the South Node, the drain point, is going over that Jupiter, and all of a sudden there's like a loss of luck. Okay, it really depends on how it's hitting your chart, but that's just one example. And I do also feel that overall, Virgo is a sign of perfectionism, the sign that pays very close attention to detail. The sign of being of service. And so between now and July of next year, just overall generalization here, that some of those things are fading out because that South Node is taking them away. And then over here, the North Node going through the sign of Pisces until July of 2026. So we're all receiving that pumping Pisces energy in. Okay, we are all still receiving a very strong dose of Pisces energy. We will have a total lunar eclipse. North Node lunar eclipse in the sign of Pisces. I think that's in September of this year. We'll talk about it when we get there. But that's pumping this energy in. That doesn't help with the drug problem. That's for sure. Again, Pisces being Neptune influences things like drugs and addictions and that sort of thing. And Pisces is ruled by Neptune. And so a lot of Pisces people are either too sensitive to be, indulging in things that would change the consciousness. But then again, a lot of Pisces people will fall into some sort of alcohol or drug addiction. Okay. And so be mindful of that as well, because we've got the pumping that Pisces energy in, but it's also the sign of oneness and spirituality and mysticism and intuition and psychic powers. So we are all also receiving that. Look to see in your chart if you've got anything near 24 degrees Pisces. If you do, that North Node is pumping more of that energy in. Okay. I think I covered everything I wanted to there. I'm kind of speeding through this thing because I got a reading coming up here in 27 minutes. Okay, so sign of Gemini rules the lungs, rules the shoulders, rules the hands, rules the fingers. The only part of the arms that is not ruled by the sign of Gemini is the elbows. That falls into this category of the sign of Cancer. And I do have a video that goes in a lot of depth about Gemini in medical astrology. You can go check that out if you want to learn more about this. But basically, this, especially at 6 degrees Gemini, it's like right at the top of the lungs is where we're all receiving this new moon energy. And especially because Mercury is right there. Mercury also has an influence on the lungs and the nervous system. And so with that said, it's a really good idea to be paying a little extra attention, especially while Jupiter's finishing up in the sign of Gemini, paying a little extra attention to our lungs. And so with that said, oh, I didn't bring the tincture up here, but I will just show you guys this. So this right here is something called mullein. You can see these leaves right here, they get huge. The plant itself, I've seen them as like 12 feet tall, depending on where they're growing. And at a certain time when they, the flowers emerge, they're usually like a yellow color and a very tall stalk. But mullein, some people will even use this for toilet paper because it's so incredibly soft, and it's a lovely plant. I know, I do know, not everybody's going to know this, but mullein it can be very invasive. Like once it's growing and it's spreading like wildfire. But it's a plant that is exceptional for healing the lungs in so many different ways. It can pull gunk out of the lungs. It can help like kind of soothe all the little all the little pieces in the lungs. It can, so you got a dry cough, the mullein can help to soothe that. You got a lot of gunk coming up. Mullein can help pull that out and soothe. And so mullein, you could obviously just do an internet search for yourself and see what the plant looks like in full. It grows like crazy all where I live. And see if the way I found mullein for the first time when I saw it, because it wasn't growing where I lived before. I was on a road trip, and all of a sudden on the side of the road, I saw it because I knew what the plant looked like. I'd seen pictures of it, and I was like, oh wow, that's mullein. Pull the car over. And so I get out of the car and I took a bunch of leaves and I pulled the stalk off. It just happened to be at a perfect time to harvest the mullein seeds. And so I took the seeds and I ended up planting mullein where I lived. And it didn't become invasive. That's where I used to live before. Then when I moved into this new place a year and a half ago or so, there just already was mullein growing out here. And I was so excited because what I do, you can smoke this. You can make a tea with it. Sometimes the little fuzzy things can be a little bit of an irritant if your lungs are super irritated. And if you're going to harvest it, you're going to want to get like the bigger leaves, like will grow first, like they'll be on the bottom. And then as it goes up, the smaller leaves, these are the ones that you're going to want to get. And these are the ones that you would want to make the tea. I like to make a tincture. What I do, this is stuff that you can look up for yourself. You just do an internet search, how to make a tincture, because it's really, really easy. You just get any kind of alcohol as long as it's at least 80%. And yes, there are little intricate parts that if you're going to get specific, but the basics of it is, which you can make medicine this way. Get a bottle of vodka. Okay. That's like, at least you can also get vodka that's like 100 proof, but even if it's 80, okay, you just cut the leaves, snip up the leaves into pieces and put them into a jar and pour the vodka, and it doesn't have to be vodka. It can be any kind of spirits. I like to use something that's called grape spirits from a organic alcohol company in Oregon. But you can, I've made it with vodka, I've made it with rum. Anyway, you put the leaves, you can do this with so many different plants. You put them in a jar, you pour the alcohol over the plant, make sure it's complete, like, so there's almost like a tiny bit more alcohol than the plant. So it's kind of covering it. I should have grabbed it and brought it up here, but I didn't. And you let it sit there for at least 2 weeks. It depends on what kind of tincture you're making. Some things are going to want to sit for longer, and some things don't want to sit for so long. I would say with Mullein, for the most part, it's usually like a month. Like, let it sit there in a month, shake it up every once in a while. And then you take the lead, like you strain the alcohol out. So then the plant matter is no longer in the alcohol. And then you take that alcohol and you put it into a little, I can't believe I didn't bring a tincture bottle up here. You put it into a little bottle that's got the little top, the little squeezy top. And it's like half, again, depends on what plant it is. But for the generalization here, it's like half alcohol, the medicinal alcohol that you just made, and half really good water. You're going to want to use, either distilled water, or I like to use, I filter my own spring water, but regardless, you wouldn't want to use just like city tap water. You'd want to use good quality water and make sure it's about half and half. Okay. Half water, half the alcohol. That's your medicine. That's your medicine for your lungs. Okay. There's also something else. Elecampane is great for the lungs. So that's that. That's what I'm going to be indulging in. But there's also the sign of Gemini also very specifically rules over the afferent nerves, which the afferent nerves are nerves that take information to your spinal cord. Okay. But Mercury and Gemini both have a very big influence on a lot of the nervous system. So with that said, you'll notice a lot of Gemini people kind of have this like hyperactive nervousness or something, like anxiousness. Milky oats or oat tops. Make sure you're getting it from a good high quality source, because the milky oat tops have to be harvested at the right time. They have to make sure that they're still milky, or you could just do oat straw. That I would prefer in a tea over a tincture, but that's great for the nervous system. Milky oats or oat tops. Also, lemon balm can be great for the nervous system. Not only that, but lemon balm is kind of uplifting. There's also hops. Hops. I keep reading that hops makes people tired. I never had that experience. I happen to really enjoy hops tincture. That could be great for the nervous system. CBD, meaning cannabidiol. I know that you can't get that everywhere out there, but that's a little bit more potent. Personally, I love it. And people hear CBD and they automatically think we're talking about just cannabis. CBD is not psychoactive. It's not going to make you high. Okay. It just has an impact on the nervous system where it can be very calming. Okay. So there's that. I will be indulging in probably my lemon balm tincture and my Mullein tincture for this new moon. Okay, now let's see. Did I miss anything there? I think we'll leave that there. As far as gemstones go, the dedicated zodiacal birthstone for the sign of Gemini is Agate. I pulled this guy out before. This right here is blue lace agate. Agate is a fantastic stone. It's super affordable. It's protective. It's great. Okay, I'm also going to show this guy here. I have two of these. I got one chunk on one side of my computer and another chunk on the other side of my computer, because it's like a blockage of this, the radiation, the dangerous electromagnetic fields that are coming off my whole system here. Like red agate is going to be a little bit more of a stimulating energy versus blue like this, or green. Blue overall is going to be like a calming, like cooling energy. The green agates tend to be a little bit more for the nervous system. Just overall green, depending on what's going on in the chart and that sort of thing. Overall green can be great for the nervous system. So can blue, but blue can even take, say, irritation away, or even inflammation away, that sort of thing. I love blue lace agate. Okay, now this one right here is labradorite, which a lot of people are familiar with. Now I'm going to say this every time I give you guys information about any kind of gemstone and how it, is how it responds with a certain zodiac sign, why it's kind of dedicated to that zodiac sign. I get the vast majority of that information through the UPA system, which you can find information about that through the Academy through Astrological Medicine. kind of like the origins of Joy Tish medical astrology. But there's also a great book that's called The Encyclopedia of Crystals by Judy Hall. I get a lot of information from there. There's just a lot of different crystal books that I've gotten the information from overall. This one, this is my own thing, because Labradorite, strangely, I don't see it in any of the books, like relating to the sign of Gemini. But yet, a lot of the books talk about how Labradorite is great for communication skills. So I'm like, I'm just going to say this. I'm just going to make this up on my own. I don't know why it's not in the books. So Labradorite is one that I'm going to be using, since I do want to focus on communication skills with this new moon. Labradorite's a little more expensive than agate, but it's also, you can get pieces that are pretty reasonable. Okay, beautiful, beautiful stone. Just look at that. I mean, it's like a trippy stone, especially when you go look it out in the sun. Okay, this right here is serpentine. Serpentine could be great for mental function as well. It's a green stone. Serpentine is a great stone for Virgo and Gemini, even Sagittarius too, now I think about it. So those are the stones I'm going to be putting on top of my journal. I'm going to use my blue lace agate, my Labradorite, and my serpentine. Okay, so I'm going to leave that there. I got to get on to a reading here. If you would like to schedule your own natal chart analysis, we can go through your transits, your progressions, whatever you'd like to focus on. You can schedule your reading at erinwageastrology.com. I do hope to hear from some of you. And until next time, namaste to all of you.